borrow gold, get 10 pounds. That many French francs. You just made 5 francs, right? If anybody can do that, this time the supply of British pound is going to increase, demand for French franc is going to increase. So that exchange rate, which is the price of 1 pound in French francs, is going to go down. So there is a built-in market mechanism that's going to make sure that as long as that fixing to the gold is enforceable, so you take your gold to the central bank, they give you the requisite amount of currency, or you take your currency to the bank, central bank, they give you a requisite amount of gold, that mechanism will work. So in a sense, the entire paper currency is backed by gold. That's what gold standard is. The trouble with that is, this is true in general. Typically, financial prices adjust a lot faster. Financial prices adjust a lot faster compared to prices of goods and services, especially goods. Let's say French and British adhere to gold standard. So let's use the 10 and 100. And suppose British economy is doing a lot better. They exploit everybody in India. So they're going to they're going to bring a lot of that stuff from India. French colonies were not as fruitful as the British colonies. So they're going to sell a lot of goods to French. That creates a trade surplus. In gold standards, when trade surplus happens, essentially there should be a transfer of gold to Britain, right? It doesn't have to be physically, but anytime I sell you something, you're going to pay me either in my currency or in gold, or if you pay me in your own currency, I'm going to convert that into my currency, and I can convert that into gold at my own central bank. The trouble is, if there is consistent trade deficits, what's going to happen? France has a big trade deficit right now. That means France lost a lot of the money. Remember, all of the money is backed by the gold. So there is a lot less money in France that is choosing more goods. What happens if there is less money, but they want to buy more? Actually, there is less money, so people cannot afford to buy more. So there's going to be a deep recession in France. Suddenly, we lost 10% of our money to Britain because of that consistent trade surplus. What's going to happen is, since prices are not going to adjust that quickly, there's going to be a deep recession in France. And in Britain, there's going to be actually a boom, and actually prices are going to increase because there is now a lot more money that's chasing same amount of goods. In France, not only there's going to be depression, there will also be deflation. differentiate between deflation and devaluation. Devaluation is reduction in the value of a currency against other currencies. Deflation is a reduction in the overall price levels. We experienced that a little bit during COVID years, but Japan experienced that quite a bit in the 90s. In fact, there were a few years where the inflation rate was 0.1%. There were celebrations in Japan. But in 1800s, especially under gold standard, deflations were very common. And all the recessions were typically very deep. Why the individual prices are not adjusting that fast? In order for a country to get out of a deep recession, under gold standard, they have to reduce their trade deficit. How do you do that? You sell more to your trade partners. Well, yes, your prices are going down. The prices in France are going down, and the prices in England are going up. That means French goods are now cheaper in Britain, but that adjustment of prices is a lot slower compared to adjustment of the exchange rate markets. But the trouble is, the exchange rate market is kind of forced by the gold standard, so it cannot move. The only thing that can move are prices in individual countries. Yes, eventually those prices move and French starts selling more to Britain or buying less from Britain, because now British goods are more expensive in France. That trade deficit goes away. But that creates a lot of fluctuations. Okay? And that's one key shortcoming. The other one, which kind of showed itself as soon as the World War I started, there is no mechanism to enforce that each country abides by those rules. Suddenly France could say, sorry, I changed my gold standard. Now 1 ounce of gold gets you only 90 francs or 200 francs, whatever it is. That would be a devaluation, for example. But major countries did not do that, especially until about First World War. Then suddenly First World War broke up, and gold standards pretty much collapsed. Why do you think it collapsed? Let me ask you a question. How do you finance a war of that dimension? Huh? A lot of money. Where do you get the money? You don't have it, so you're going to either borrow it or you're going to tax people. Trust me, if you're spending a lot of money in a war and you're taxing people, that government is not going to stay alive. Or as it happened to Russians, they both taxed and they were in a war. They were rumblings of a revolution long before that anyway, because of the economic injustices. But the revolution came about and Russians pretty much had to get out of war that way. These countries basically got out of the gold standard, because the only way you could do that is devalue your currency and make money out of it. And print more money. By the time you print more money, and that creates inflation. By the time it creates inflation, you created some seigniorage. It's kind of hidden taxation. That's because prices do not move as fast as the devaluation of the currency. And after First World War happened, there were some attempts for countries to bring it back, especially Britain tried it, until about 1929, with the crash of the market and the Great Depression. But there was other issues. Do you guys know what happened to countries like Bulgaria, Hungary, Austria, and Germany after the First World War ended? Sure, I mean, they lost the war, but what was the biggest economic phenomenon in those countries? Do you know? Hyperinflation. That's very different from high inflation. You can learn to live with 40% inflation a year as long as it's kind of stable. Because you kind of start indexing contracts to inflation or indexing contracts to foreign exchange. Hyperinflation was millions and millions of percent inflation. You cannot plan. I mean, it's kind of a joke. You get to work in the morning in Germany, and you know you have to buy food for the dinner. By the time you get out and you went to the market, prices have doubled, but you get paid the same amount. Of course, next day they paid you more, but by the time you went home again, it doubled. It didn't necessarily happen in a day, but it happened relatively quickly. Let me show you some denominations of currency. Just let's see. That is 50,000 Deutschmark, 56,000 Deutschmark. Did you guys know what was the biggest denomination of Deutschmark before euro? It's not even Deutschmark, it's just mark. I think it was 1,000. That's one of the reasons the largest denominations of euro is 500, because when it was fixed, 1 euro bought you 1.95583 Deutschmarks when you had to convert those. I just happened to memorize that number because I had some Deutschmarks, physical Deutschmarks those days.